The dust cloud rose like a crimson sunset behind the bucking bronco as Nathan Ortega gripped the leather reins with both hands, his body moving in perfect rhythm with the wild animal beneath him. The crowd in Truckee, California, roared so loud on that blazing August afternoon in 1885 that he could barely hear his own thoughts, but he did not need to think any more, only to feel the pulse of the horse, the stretch of each second, the way his muscles burned with the effort of staying mounted for just 8 more seconds. 7, 6. The animal twisted beneath him with a violence that would have thrown any lesser rider into the dirt, but Nathan had been born to this life, raised on horses since he could walk, and he knew in his bones that this ride would be the one that changed everything. When the buzzer sounded and the handlers rushed forward to calm the bronco, Nathan dismounted with the grace of a man who had done this 1,000 times, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a prisoner desperate for freedom. He pulled off his hat and waved it to the crowd, dust covering his dark hair and tanned face, his green eyes scanning the bleachers almost involuntarily until they found her. Katherine Thorne sat 3 rows up, her hands pressed against her mouth, her brown eyes wide with what looked like fear that had just transformed into relief. She wore a simple blue calico dress that somehow made her stand out among all the other women in their Sunday best, and when their eyes met across the distance, Nathan felt something in his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the ride he had just completed. The announcer's voice boomed across the rodeo grounds, declaring Nathan Ortega the winner of the annual Truckee Rodeo Championship, and the prize money of $500, a fortune that could buy a man a good piece of land or stock a ranch with quality cattle. Nathan walked toward the judging platform, his legs still shaking from the adrenaline, his mind already racing ahead to what he was about to do. He had planned this for weeks, ever since he had learned that Katherine's father had died suddenly in a mining accident, leaving her and her younger brother with nothing but debts and a boarding house that was falling apart. She had been working herself to exhaustion trying to keep the place running, cooking and cleaning for rough miners who sometimes forgot to pay, and Nathan had watched her grow thinner and more tired with each passing week. The rodeo organizer, a portly man named Henderson who owned the general store, handed Nathan a leather pouch heavy with gold coins and paper notes. "Congratulations, son. That was the finest bronco riding I have seen in 20 years of running this competition. Your father would have been proud." Nathan's throat tightened at the mention of his father, who had died 2 years earlier in a cattle drive gone wrong, but he nodded his thanks and turned back toward the crowd. He knew exactly where Katherine would be, because she always sat in the same section, always came to watch despite having no time to spare, and he had never understood why until 3 months ago when she had brought him a basket of food after he had helped repair the roof of her boarding house. She had looked at him then with something in her eyes that made his heart stop, something tender and fragile and real. He found her standing near the refreshment stand, her brother Daniel beside her, a gangly 15-year-old with their father's red hair and a face full of freckles. Katherine was smoothing down her skirt nervously, and when she saw Nathan approaching, her face flushed the color of wild roses. She was 22, the same age as Nathan, and she had the kind of beauty that came from strength rather than delicacy, with capable hands and a direct gaze that most men found intimidating. Nathan had always found it captivating. "Katherine," he said, pulling off his hat again because his mother had raised him with manners. "I need to talk to you." Daniel looked between them with the knowing expression of a younger sibling who had figured out secrets no one had told him. "I will go get some lemonade," he announced, disappearing into the crowd with unusual tact. Katherine folded her arms across her chest, but Nathan could see the pulse beating fast in her throat. "That was quite a ride, Nathan. I thought for sure you were going to get thrown when that horse twisted sideways." "I have been riding since before I could walk properly," he said, trying to sound casual despite the way his heart was racing faster than it had during the competition. "Katherine, I want to give you something." She frowned, her dark eyebrows drawing together. "If this is about the roof repairs again, I told you I would pay you back when I could. It is not about the roof." He held out the leather pouch, the weight of it substantial in his palm. "This is the prize money from the rodeo. $500. I want you to have it." For a moment, Katherine just stared at the pouch as if it were a rattlesnake that might strike at any second. Then she looked up at his face, her eyes searching his expression for some explanation that would make sense. "Nathan, I cannot possibly accept that. You won that money. You risked your life for it. And I want you to have it," he said firmly. "Katherine, I have watched you work yourself nearly to death trying to save your father's boarding house. I have seen you going without meals so Daniel could eat. I have seen the worry in your eyes when you think no one is looking. This money could pay off your father's debts and give you enough to fix up the boarding house properly, maybe even hire some help." Her eyes were shining now, though whether with tears or anger he could not tell. "Why would you do this? We are not family, Nathan. We barely know each other beyond neighborly acquaintance." "That is not true, and you know it," he said quietly, taking a step closer. Around them, the rodeo crowd was dispersing, families heading toward their wagons and horses, cowboys celebrating at the saloon across the street. But Nathan was aware only of Katherine, and the way she was looking at him as if he had just offered her the world and she did not know whether to take it or run from it. "I have been helping around your boarding house for months now. We have talked about everything from books to politics to what we want from life. And I know you feel what I feel when we are together." Katherine's breath caught audibly. She looked down at the pouch again, then back at his face. "Nathan, this is too much. I cannot accept charity, especially not from you." "It is not charity," he said, his voice rougher now with emotion he could not hide. "Katherine, I am in love with you. I have been in love with you since the day you told off those drunk miners who were causing trouble in the street, standing there with a broom like it was a rifle and not a bit of fear in your eyes. I want to help you because I care about you, because I want to be part of your life, because the thought of you struggling alone keeps me awake at night." The silence that followed felt like it lasted for hours, though it could only have been seconds. Katherine's eyes were wide, her lips parted in shock, and Nathan wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life by confessing his feelings so boldly. Then, slowly, she reached out and took the leather pouch from his hand, but instead of opening it or putting it away, she set it down on the nearby bench and stepped closer to him. "You stubborn, impossible man," she said, and there were definitely tears in her eyes now, sliding down her cheeks though she was smiling. "Do you have any idea what you have just done? Do you understand that I cannot possibly pay you back, that this will tie us together in a way that I cannot escape from?" "I am counting on it," Nathan said, reaching up to brush away one of her tears with his thumb. "Katherine, I do not want you to pay me back. I want you to let me help you. I want you to trust me. And if you feel even a fraction of what I feel for you, then I want you to give us a chance." She laughed, a sound that was half sob, and then she did something that shocked them both. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him, right there in front of anyone who might be watching. A kiss that was fierce and desperate, and full of all the emotion she had clearly been holding back for months. Nathan wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her back, tasting salt from her tears and something sweeter, feeling the way she fit against him perfectly, as if they had been designed for this moment. When they finally pulled apart, Both breathing hard, Katherine pressed her forehead against his chest. "I have been in love with you too," she whispered. "But I thought you were just being kind, just helping out because you are a good man. I never imagined you might feel this way about me." "How could I not?" Nathan said, tilting her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You are everything I want, Katherine." She kissed him again, softer this time, and when they separated, she picked up the leather pouch with trembling hands. "I will accept this on one condition," she said. "You have to let me make you a partner in the boarding house. If we are going to do this, if we are going to build something together, then it has to be equal. I will not be some woman you rescue and support. I need to stand beside you, not behind you." Nathan grinned, feeling a surge of joy so intense it almost hurt. "I would not want it any other way. Though I should warn you, I know nothing about running a boarding house. I am just a cowboy and a ranch hand." "Then I will teach you," Katherine said, smiling back at him. "And you can teach me about horses and cattle and all the things you know. We will learn together." Daniel reappeared then, carrying 2 cups of lemonade and looking supremely pleased with himself. "I take it you two finally figured things out," he said, handing 1 cup to Katherine. "Because honestly, watching you dance around each other for months has been painful." Katherine laughed and ruffled her brother's hair, which he immediately tried to smooth back down. "Yes, we figured things out. Nathan is going to help us save the boarding house, and we are going to be partners." Daniel's eyes widened when he saw the leather pouch. "Is that the prize money?" "Nathan, you cannot just give that away." "I am not giving it away," Nathan said. "I am investing it in something I believe in people I believe in." The boy looked at him with something like hero worship, and Nathan felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He was taking on not just Katherine but her brother as well, becoming a part of their small, struggling family. But instead of feeling burdened, he felt lighter than he had in years, as if he had finally found the purpose he had been searching for since his father's death. Over the next few weeks, Nathan moved what few belongings he had from the small room he rented above the livery stable to the boarding house on Pine Street. The building was a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging front porch, but it had good bones, as Katherine liked to say. And with the prize money, they were able to hire a carpenter to fix the worst of the structural problems. Nathan spent his days working as a ranch hand for the Morrison Ranch just outside of town, and his evenings helping Katherine clean and repair the boarding house rooms, cooking meals for the half-dozen miners and railroad workers who rented rooms, and getting to know Daniel better. The boy had dreams of becoming an engineer, designing bridges and railways, and Nathan encouraged him to keep studying the mathematics books their father had left behind. In the evenings, after the work was done, Nathan and Katherine would sit on the newly repaired front porch and talk for hours, learning everything about each other, sharing their hopes and fears and memories. Katherine told him about her mother, who had died when she was 12, and how she had taken over the household duties, learning to cook and clean and manage money at an age when most girls were still playing with dolls. Nathan told her about his father's dream of owning a ranch, and how he had been saving money for years to buy land, but had spent it all on medical bills and the funeral when the old man died. "We could still do that someday," Katherine said one evening, her hand warm in his as they watched the sun set over the Sierra Nevada mountains that loomed to the west. "Buy land, start a ranch. Once the boarding house is stable and profitable, we could save together." "I like the sound of that," Nathan said, squeezing her hand. "Building something of our own, something we could pass down to our children someday." Katherine blushed at the mention of children, but she did not pull her hand away. "You are getting ahead of yourself, Nathan Ortega. You have not even properly proposed to me yet." He turned to face her fully, his heart suddenly pounding. "Would you want me to? Would I want you to propose?" Katherine's eyes sparkled with mischief and something deeper. "Nathan, I am wearing your mother's locket that you gave me last week. I am planning our future with you. What do you think?" Nathan stood up abruptly and went inside the boarding house, leaving Katherine looking confused on the porch. He returned a moment later with something clutched in his hand, and when he knelt down on the wooden boards in front of her chair, her eyes went wide. "This is not how I planned to do this," he said, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "I bought this 3 days ago from the jeweler on Commercial Row, and I have been carrying it around waiting for the perfect moment. But I realize that with you, every moment is perfect. Katherine Thorne, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and building dreams with you and being the man you deserve?" Tears were streaming down Katherine's face now, but she was laughing too, nodding so vigorously that her dark hair fell loose from its pins. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course I will marry you. I love you, Nathan. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, which seemed like a sign from God or fate or whatever force had brought them together. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the love and passion he had been holding back, trying to be respectful, trying to be proper. Katherine kissed him back just as fiercely, her fingers threading through his hair, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "We should probably go inside," Katherine said, her voice shaky, "before we scandalize the neighbors." Nathan laughed and followed her into the boarding house, where Daniel was pretending very hard to be focused on his mathematics homework and not grinning like a fool. "It is about time," the boy said. "I was starting to think you would never ask her. You knew I had the ring?" Nathan asked in surprise. "I saw you hiding it in your saddlebag last week when I was checking on your horse," Daniel admitted. "I have been waiting for you to work up the courage." Katherine threw a dish towel at her brother, but she was laughing, and Nathan thought he had never seen her look happier or more beautiful than she did in that moment, standing in the warm lamplight of the boarding house kitchen with flour on her apron and joy in her eyes. This was what he wanted, he realized. Not grand adventures or glory or riches, but this simple domestic happiness, this sense of belonging, this feeling of being home. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church on Bridge Street, with half the town in attendance because everyone in Truckee had heard the story of the cowboy, who had given away his rodeo winnings for love. Katherine wore a dress of cream-colored silk that had been her mother's, altered to fit her by the town seamstress, and she carried wildflowers that Nathan had picked himself from the meadow east of town. Daniel stood as Nathan's best man, pride evident in every line of his young face, and Katherine's best friend Sarah Morrison, the daughter of Nathan's employer, served as her maid of honor. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed Katherine with such tenderness that several of the older women in the congregation were heard sniffling into their handkerchiefs. Afterwards, there was a celebration at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing that went on until well past midnight. Nathan danced with his new wife until his feet ached, and when they finally climbed the stairs to the bedroom they would now share, he felt as though his heart might burst from happiness. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and perfect, full of whispered confessions and gentle discoveries. And when Nathan woke the next morning with Katherine sleeping peacefully in his arms, he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. They had both lost so much, their fathers, their security, their sense of what the future might hold, but somehow they had found each other, and that seemed like more than enough. The months that followed were not easy. Running a boarding house was harder work than Nathan had imagined, with constant repairs needed, meals to cook 3 times a day, linens to wash and change, and the challenge of dealing with boarders who sometimes drank too much or failed to pay on time. But Nathan and Katherine worked together seamlessly, developing a rhythm and partnership that made even the hardest days bearable. Katherine taught Nathan how to cook edible biscuits and how to negotiate with suppliers for better prices on flour and sugar. Nathan taught Katherine how to handle the more difficult boarders with a firm hand and a steely gaze that discouraged trouble before it started. By the spring of 1886, the boarding house was not only solvent but actually making a small profit, enough that they were able to start putting money aside for their dream of buying land. Daniel was excelling in his studies and talking about applying to a technical college in San Francisco in another year, though he worried about leaving Katherine. Nathan assured him that they would be fine, that Katherine had him now, and that the boy deserved to pursue his dreams. It was in late May, when the Sierra Nevada wildflowers were at their peak and the days were warm and golden, that Katherine told Nathan she was pregnant. They were sitting by the creek that ran behind the boarding house, taking a rare afternoon off, and when she spoke the words, Nathan felt his entire world shift and expand to include this new possibility, this new life they had created together. "Are you happy?" Katherine asked anxiously, searching his face. "I know we did not plan this so soon and with the boarding house still requiring so much work." Nathan pulled her close and kissed her deeply. "I am more than happy. I am overjoyed. Katherine, you are giving me everything I have ever wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. How could I be anything but grateful?" She relaxed against him, and they sat there for a long time, watching the water flow over the rocks and planning for this new chapter of their lives. They would need to rearrange the rooms in the boarding house to make space for a nursery. They would need to save more money, prepare for the expenses of a child. But Nathan felt ready for all of it, ready to be a father, ready to expand their family. The pregnancy was not easy for Katherine. She was sick nearly every morning for the first few months, and Nathan took over more of the cooking and cleaning, waking early to prepare breakfast for the boarders while Katherine rested. Sarah Morrison became a frequent visitor, bringing remedies and advice from her own mother, who had raised 7 children. Daniel hovered protectively over his sister, bringing her books to read and tea to settle her stomach, and Nathan fell even more deeply in love with his wife as he watched her endure the discomforts of pregnancy with quiet strength. As Katherine's belly grew rounder, Nathan found himself talking to the baby, telling it stories about its grandparents and the ranch they would someday build. He would press his hand against Katherine's stomach and feel the flutter of movement, and each time it filled him with a wonder so profound he could barely breathe. This was his child, his and Katherine's, a new life that would carry both their blood and their hopes into the future. In early January of 1887, on a snowy night when the wind howled around the boarding house and the world seemed wrapped in white silence, Katherine went into labor. Nathan sent Daniel running for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered half the babies in Truckee. And then he stayed by Katherine's side, holding her hand and offering what comfort he could as the hours stretched on. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Nathan felt helpless and terrified, but Katherine was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined. And when the baby finally came in the gray light of dawn, a lusty, crying boy with a shock of dark hair, Nathan wept with relief and joy. They named him Thomas, after Katherine's father, with the middle name James after Nathan's father. Little Thomas Ortega was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them awake most nights and brought more chaos and love into their lives than Nathan had thought possible. Katherine was a natural mother, patient and nurturing, though she also refused to give up her role in running the boarding house. She would nurse the baby while going over the account books or rock him to sleep while discussing menu plans with Nathan. Daniel adored his nephew and could often be found making silly faces to make Thomas laugh or holding him so Katherine could get some much-needed rest. Nathan discovered that he loved being a father, loved the weight of his son in his arms, the baby smell of him, the way Thomas would grip his finger with surprising strength. He would walk the floors at night when Thomas was fussy, singing old cowboy songs his father had taught him, and feel a contentment so deep it was almost like peace. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the boarding house continued to thrive. They hired a young woman named Emma to help with the cooking and cleaning, which freed up more of Katherine's time to focus on Thomas and the financial side of the business. Nathan continued working at the Morrison Ranch during the day, saving every penny he could toward the land they wanted to buy. He had his eye on a property about 10 miles outside of Truckee, 200 acres with good water and grazing land, and the owner was willing to sell for a reasonable price. By the summer of 1888, they had saved enough for a down payment, and Nathan approached the owner, a retired rancher named Mitchell who was moving to Sacramento to live with his daughter. The negotiations took several weeks, but finally they reached an agreement, and Nathan found himself the owner of land for the first time in his life. He took Katherine and Thomas out to see the property on a warm August afternoon, and as they stood on a small rise overlooking the creek that ran through the center of the land, Katherine squeezed his hand tightly. "This is really ours?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. "This is really ours," Nathan confirmed. "We will need to keep the boarding house running for income while we build it up, but eventually we can move out here, build a house, start a herd. This is our future, Katherine. This is what we worked for." Thomas, now a year and a half old, toddled through the grass, chasing butterflies and laughing with pure delight. Katherine watched him with tears in her eyes. "Your father would have been so proud of you," she said softly. "Both our fathers would be proud. We took what they left us, their dreams and their debts, and we built something beautiful." Nathan wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "We built it together. That is the important part. I could never have done this without you." They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring their land, making plans for where to build the house and the barn, where to fence for pasture, which trees to leave standing for shade. Thomas fell asleep on the ride back to town, and Katherine dozed against Nathan's shoulder as the wagon rattled along the dusty road. Nathan drove slowly, savoring the moment, thinking about how much his life had changed since that day at the rodeo 3 years earlier when he had given away his prize money on impulse and faith. The next few years were a blur of hard work and steady progress. Nathan spent his days off from the Morrison Ranch working on their own land, first building a sturdy barn, then starting on a house. It was slow going, doing most of the work himself with occasional help from friends and neighbors. But by the spring of 1890, they had a small but solid 2-bedroom house with a wide front porch and a view of the mountains. Katherine was pregnant again by then, and they decided to make the move from the boarding house to the ranch before the baby came. Daniel, now 19, had been accepted to a technical college in San Francisco and would be leaving in the fall. He helped them move their belongings and get settled in the new house, and Nathan could see the mixture of excitement and sadness in the young man's eyes. Daniel had been part of their family for so long, it would be strange without him, but Nathan knew it was time for him to pursue his own dreams. Katherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, in June of that year. The birth was easier than Thomas's had been, and Margaret was a placid, happy baby who seemed content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes. Thomas, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding, though his help was not always as useful as he believed it to be. With the boarding house sold to a young couple from Sacramento, and their full attention on the ranch, Nathan and Katherine threw themselves into building their dream. They started with a small herd of cattle, just 20 head, and a few horses. Nathan proved to have his father's gift for working with animals, and soon he was breeding horses that were known throughout the region for their strength and temperament. Katherine managed the ranch accounts and the household with the same capable efficiency she had brought to the boarding house, and somehow found time to plant a garden that produced more vegetables than they could possibly eat. Life on the ranch was hard but satisfying. There were challenges, droughts and harsh winters and sick animals, but Nathan and Katherine faced them all together, their partnership strengthened by years of working side by side. They added to their herd slowly but steadily, and by 1893 they had over 100 head of cattle and were selling horses to ranches all over California and Nevada. Thomas grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who loved riding and roping and helping his father with the ranch work. Margaret was quieter but equally determined, following her mother around and learning everything Katherine could teach her about cooking and gardening and managing a household. In the evenings, the family would gather on the front porch, Nathan playing old songs on the guitar that had been his father's, Katherine mending clothes or snapping beans, the children playing games or doing schoolwork. Daniel came home to visit whenever he could, full of stories about his studies and the engineering projects he was working on. He had grown into a confident young man, and Nathan was proud of him, proud of the way he had supported Katherine and respected Nathan, proud of the way he had pursued his dreams without forgetting where he came from. In the summer of 1895, Katherine told Nathan she was pregnant again, and this time Nathan was prepared. He hired a woman from town to come help with Margaret and Thomas during the final months of the pregnancy and the early weeks after the birth, and he made sure Katherine rested as much as possible. Their third child, another son they named Peter, arrived in February of 1896, in the middle of a snowstorm that trapped them in the house for 3 days. Peter was a fussy baby, colicky and difficult, and there were nights when Nathan walked the floors with him for hours while Katherine slept in exhaustion. But even in those difficult moments, Nathan felt grateful. Grateful for his family, for the ranch they had built, for the life they were living. It was not the life he had imagined when he was a young cowboy dreaming of adventure and glory, but it was so much better, so much richer and more meaningful. As the children grew, Nathan taught them about the land and the animals, about hard work and integrity and treating people with respect. Katherine taught them about literature and mathematics and the importance of education, making sure they had books and encouraging their curiosity. Together, Nathan and Katherine created a home filled with love and laughter, and the kind of security neither of them had known growing up. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1898, they had expanded their holdings to over 500 acres, and their cattle and horses were bringing in good money. They hired a few ranch hands to help with the work, and Nathan found that he enjoyed the role of boss and mentor, teaching young cowboys the skills his father had taught him. Katherine had become a respected figure in the community, known for her business acumen and her charitable work helping families in need. Thomas was now 11, Margaret 8, and Peter 2, and the house that had once seemed spacious now felt full to bursting with the noise and chaos of family life. Nathan loved every minute of it, even the difficult moments, even the times when the children fought or the work seemed overwhelming. This was what he had been meant for, he realized. Not the solitary life of a cowboy, but this messy, beautiful, complicated existence as a husband and father and rancher. One evening in late spring of 1899, after the children had been put to bed, and the ranch was quiet except for the sound of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle, Nathan and Katherine sat on their porch swing, rocking gently in the warm darkness. Katherine's head rested on Nathan's shoulder, and his arm was wrapped around her waist, and they sat in comfortable silence for a long time. "Do you ever think about that day at the rodeo?" Katherine asked finally. "When you gave me the prize money?" Nathan smiled in the darkness. "I think about it all the time. It was the best decision I ever made." "I think about what I almost did," Katherine said quietly. "I almost refused the money, did you know that? I almost let my pride get in the way of accepting help. If I had, none of this would exist. We would not be here together." "But you did accept it," Nathan said, squeezing her gently. "And you kissed me, right there in front of everyone, which was the bravest thing I had ever seen anyone do." Katherine laughed softly. "I was terrified, but I was also so in love with you that I could not help myself. You had just given me everything you had won, everything you had worked for, and told me you loved me. How could I not kiss you?" "I would do it again," Nathan said seriously. "Every single thing exactly the same way. The rodeo, the prize money, proposing to you on the porch of the boarding house. All of it, because it brought me here to this life with you." Katherine turned to face him, and even in the dim light from the stars, Nathan could see the tears shining in her eyes. "I love you, Nathan Ortega. I have loved you since the day you first came to fix my roof, though I did not admit it to myself for months, and I will love you until the day I die." Nathan kissed her then, a deep, tender kiss that held all the years they had spent together, and all the years they still had ahead of them. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, and they sat together on the swing until late into the night, talking about their children and the ranch and the future they were still building together. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Thomas grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, and it became clear that he would take over the operation someday. Margaret developed a passion for teaching and announced her intention to attend the Teachers' College in Sacramento. Peter was still young but showed signs of inheriting his father's skill with horses. In 1902, Daniel married a lovely young woman he had met in San Francisco, an artist named Julia, and they had their first child the following year. Daniel had become a successful engineer, working on bridge projects all over California, and he brought his family to visit the ranch whenever he could. Nathan and Katherine became aunt and uncle to Daniel's growing family, and the house was filled with even more noise and laughter during those visits. Nathan turned 40 in 1903, and Katherine organized a surprise party that brought friends and neighbors from all over the region. As Nathan looked around at the faces of the people he loved, the family he had helped create, the community he had become part of, he felt a sense of accomplishment and contentment that he knew many men never achieved. He had taken the money he won at a rodeo and turned it into this, a ranch, a family, a legacy that would outlast him. But he knew the real prize had not been the money at all. The real prize had been Katherine, who had taken a chance on a cowboy who loved her, who had kissed him in front of the whole town, who had built this life alongside him brick by brick and year by year. She was the reason for everything good in his life, and he made sure she knew it, every single day. As Katherine approached him at the party, carrying a cake she had baked herself despite his protests that she should let someone else do the work, Nathan pulled her into his arms and kissed her in front of all their guests, just as she had kissed him at that rodeo 18 years earlier. The crowd cheered and clapped, and Katherine blushed the way she always did, but she kissed him back with all the love and passion of their younger years. "Happy birthday, my love," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for giving me everything." "I should be thanking you," Nathan said. "You are the one who gave me everything, Katherine. You are my whole world." The children groaned at their parents' display of affection, but Nathan could see the smiles on their faces, could see that they were learning what love looked like, what a strong marriage could be. That was perhaps the greatest gift he could give them, the example of two people who chose each other every day, who worked together through difficulties, who never stopped being partners and lovers and best friends. In 1905, Thomas turned 18 and officially became Nathan's partner in running the ranch. The young man had grown tall and strong, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's skill with horses, and Nathan felt a fierce pride watching him work. Margaret left for college that same year, and though Katherine cried when they said goodbye, Nathan knew it was right. Their daughter had dreams of her own to pursue, just as they all had. Peter, now 9, was starting to show interest in the business side of ranching, asking questions about breeding programs and market prices that surprised Nathan with their sophistication. The boy had a sharp mind and a natural head for numbers, and Nathan began teaching him about the financial aspects of running the ranch, sharing lessons Katherine had taught him years earlier. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By 1907, they owned over 1,000 acres and employed a dozen ranch hands. Their cattle and horses were known throughout the West for their quality, and Nathan found himself traveling occasionally to livestock shows and auctions, representing their brand. But he never stayed away longer than necessary, always eager to return home to Katherine and the life they had built. Katherine had grown even more beautiful with age, her dark hair now threaded with silver, her face marked with the lines of laughter and hard work. She moved with the confidence of a woman who knew her own worth, who had survived loss and hardship and come out stronger. Nathan fell in love with her anew every day, finding fresh reasons to admire her strength, her intelligence, her compassion, her humor. In the evenings, they still sat on their porch swing, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes their grown children joined them, Thomas bringing his new bride Emma, a rancher's daughter from the neighboring property, Margaret home on breaks from college with stories about her studies, and the school where she was doing practice teaching, Peter practicing the rope tricks Nathan had taught him. The family Nathan and Katherine had created was expanding, growing into the next generation, and it filled Nathan with a satisfaction deeper than any rodeo championship ever could have. As 1910 approached, Nathan and Katherine celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary. Thomas and Emma announced that they were expecting their first child, making Nathan and Katherine grandparents for the first time. Margaret had graduated from college and secured a teaching position in a school just 30 miles from the ranch, close enough to visit regularly. Peter was 13 and talking about studying veterinary medicine, fascinated by animal health and breeding. Daniel and Julia now had 3 children of their own and had moved back to California, settling in Sacramento, where Daniel had taken a prestigious position designing the new state building. The families gathered at the ranch for Thanksgiving that year, and the house overflowed with people and food and love. Nathan looked around the crowded table at the feast Katherine had prepared, at the faces of his children and nieces and nephews, at Daniel, who had become like a brother to him, at Katherine sitting across from him with joy shining in her eyes, and he felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I would like to say something," he announced, standing up and raising his glass of wine. The conversation quieted and all eyes turned toward him. 25 years ago, I won a rodeo championship and $500 in prize money. I gave that money to a woman I barely knew but already loved, because I could see she needed help, and I wanted to be the one to give it to her. She kissed me in front of half of Truckee, and we built a life together that has exceeded every dream I ever had. He looked directly at Katherine, his voice growing thick with emotion. "Katherine, you are the love of my life, my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children. Everything good in my world exists because of you, because of the choice you made to take a chance on a cowboy who had nothing but love to offer. Thank you for 23 years of marriage, for 3 incredible children, for this ranch and this family and this life. I would give away 1,000 rodeo prizes to have even one more day with you." Katherine was crying openly now, and she stood up and walked around the table to embrace him. "You gave me everything, Nathan. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I needed it most, a partner when I was trying to do everything alone. You are the best man I have ever known, and I am grateful every single day that you chose me." They kissed to the sound of applause and a few good-natured whistles from their children. And when they sat back down, the conversation resumed with even more warmth and laughter. Later that night, after all the guests had gone to bed in the various rooms of the now much larger ranch house, Nathan and Katherine slipped outside to their porch swing. "This is my favorite place," Katherine said, settling into the curve of Nathan's arm. "Right here with you, watching the stars." "Mine too," Nathan agreed, "though anywhere with you is my favorite place." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only came from years of knowing each other completely. Then Katherine spoke again, her voice soft in the darkness. "Do you remember what you said to me that day at the rodeo? You said you wanted to help me because the thought of me struggling alone kept you awake at night." "I remember," Nathan said. "It was true then, and it is true now." "No one had ever said anything like that to me before," Katherine continued. "No one had ever made me feel like I mattered that much, like my happiness was important to someone else. And when you gave me that money, when you looked at me and told me you loved me, I felt like I could breathe for the first time since my father died. You saved me, Nathan." "You saved me too," Nathan said quietly. "I was just drifting before I met you, working ranch jobs and living day to day with no real purpose. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, to be better than I was. You made me want to be the kind of man who deserved you." Katherine turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the starlight. "You have always been that man. From the very first day you came to help with my roof, expecting nothing in return. You have always been kind and strong and honest and true. That is who you are, Nathan Ortega, and that is who I fell in love with." Nathan kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, feeling the same rush of love and desire he had felt on their wedding night all those years ago. They had grown older together, their bodies marked by time and hard work, but the connection between them was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect. "I love you," he whispered, "more than words can say." "Show me then," Katherine whispered back, and there was a playful light in her eyes that made Nathan laugh and sweep her up into his arms, carrying her into the house and up the stairs to their bedroom, where they spent the rest of the night showing each other exactly how much they were still in love. The next few years brought more changes and more joys. Thomas and Emma had a son they named Nathan James, and watching his son hold his own child, Nathan felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that was both humbling and exhilarating. Margaret met a teacher from her school, a kind man named Robert who shared her passion for education, and they were married in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch in the spring of 1912. Peter was accepted to a veterinary program in Sacramento and prepared to leave home, though he promised to return to the ranch after finishing his studies. The ranch had become one of the most successful in the region, known for the quality of its livestock and the integrity of its owners. Nathan and Katherine were respected members of the community, sought out for advice and leadership. They had built something that would outlast them, a legacy of hard work and love that would pass down through their children and grandchildren. In the summer of 1913, Truckee announced it would be holding a special rodeo to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the town's founding. Nathan had not competed in a rodeo since the one where he had won the championship in 1885, but his friends and neighbors urged him to participate in the exhibition events, to show the younger generation how it was done. At first he refused, saying he was too old at 50 to be riding broncos, but Katherine convinced him. "You were magnificent that day," she said, her eyes sparkling with the memory. "I want our grandchildren to see what you can do, to understand why you were legendary." So Nathan agreed, and on a hot August afternoon that felt eerily similar to that day 28 years earlier, he climbed onto a bucking bronco in front of a crowd that included his wife, his children, his grandchildren, and half the county. His body was older now, not as flexible or strong as it had been, but muscle memory took over, and Nathan rode that bronco with the same skill and grace he had shown decades earlier. When the buzzer sounded and he dismounted to thunderous applause, Katherine was waiting for him at the gate, just as she had been all those years ago. But this time, she did not wait for him to approach her. She ran to him and threw her arms around him, kissing him with all the passion and joy she had shown on that first day, and Nathan held her tight, aware that everyone was watching and not caring one bit. "You are still my champion," she said against his lips. "You will always be my champion." "And you will always be my prize," Nathan replied. "The only prize that ever mattered." Their grandson, little Nathan James, now 2 years old, toddled over and demanded to be picked up by his grandfather. Nathan scooped him up, settling the boy on his hip, and Katherine wrapped her arm around Nathan's waist. Together, they walked through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, surrounded by the family and community they had built together. That evening, as the sun set over their ranch, and the family gathered for dinner, Nathan looked around the table at the faces of the people he loved most in the world. Thomas and Emma with their 2 children, Margaret and Robert visiting from their home near Sacramento, Peter home from veterinary school, Daniel and Julia and their 3 children. All of them here because of a decision he had made 28 years earlier to give away his prize money to a woman who needed help. "You look thoughtful," Katherine said, squeezing his hand under the table. "I am just counting my blessings," Nathan said, "and realizing how rich I am." "The ranch is doing very well," Katherine agreed, misunderstanding him deliberately, her eyes twinkling. "I am not talking about money," Nathan said, raising his voice slightly so the whole table could hear. "I am talking about this, all of you. The family we have created, the love we share, the life we have built together. That is true wealth. That is what matters." Thomas raised his glass. "To family," he said. "To family," everyone echoed, and they drank together. Later that night, Nathan and Katherine lay in bed together, her head resting on his chest, his fingers gently stroking her hair. They had been married for 28 years, together for even longer, and Nathan knew every inch of her as well as he knew himself. He knew the sound of her breathing when she was falling asleep, the way she hummed tunelessly when she was cooking, the particular smile she reserved just for him. She was woven into every part of his life, inseparable from his identity, and he could not imagine existing without her. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Katherine asked sleepily. "For saying yes, for kissing me at the rodeo, for building this life with me, for everything." Katherine tilted her head up to kiss his jaw. "Thank you for giving me the prize money, for taking a chance on me, for loving me the way you do, for being exactly the man I needed." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Nathan's last thought before sleep claimed him was that he was the luckiest man alive. The years continued their steady march forward. Nathan turned 60 in 1923, and Katherine was 59, both of them slowing down but still active and engaged with the ranch and their family. Thomas had taken over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, running it with the same skill and integrity his father had shown, and Nathan found himself in the role of advisor and grandfather, which suited him just fine. They had 4 grandchildren now, with another on the way, and the ranch house was constantly filled with the sound of children's laughter and running feet. Margaret and Robert had 2 children of their own and had moved closer to the ranch, with Robert taking a position as principal of the school in Truckee. Peter had finished veterinary school and returned to work on the ranch, specializing in horse breeding and bringing new techniques and knowledge to the operation. The ranch had weathered economic ups and downs, droughts and harsh winters, but it had survived and continued to thrive. Nathan and Katherine had built something solid and lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. They had achieved the dream Nathan's father had held, owning land and raising cattle, but they had also achieved something his father had never had: a long and happy marriage, children and grandchildren, a full and rich life. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1925, the family threw a massive celebration at the ranch. Over 200 people attended, including neighbors, friends, business associates, and family members who traveled from all over California. There was music and dancing and food enough to feed an army, and Nathan and Katherine were presented with gifts and tributes that made them both emotional. But the moment Nathan treasured most came late in the evening, when most of the guests had gone home and only family remained. Katherine took his hand and led him out to their porch swing, and they sat together in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle and the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. 40 years, Katherine said wonderingly. Where did the time go? It went into this, Nathan said, gesturing at the house, the land, the family gathered inside. Into building a life worth living. Do you have any regrets? Katherine asked, and Nathan heard the vulnerability in her voice, the fear that maybe he had given up too much when he gave her that prize money. Not one, Nathan said firmly, turning to face her. Katherine, you have to know by now that you were never a burden or a charity case. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Giving you that money was not a sacrifice. It was an investment, the smartest investment I ever made, because it brought me you. Tears rolled down Katherine's cheeks, and Nathan wiped them away gently with his thumbs. I love you, she said. I have loved you for 40 years, and I will love you for however many years we have left. I love you too, Nathan said, more than life itself. They kissed then, a sweet and tender kiss that held 4 decades of shared life, of joys and sorrows and ordinary moments that had somehow added up to an extraordinary existence. When they pulled apart, they sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the stars, content in the knowledge that they had built something beautiful together. Nathan lived to be 73 years old, passing away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1936 with Katherine holding his hand. His last words to her were the same words he had spoken to her countless times over their 50 years together. "You are my prize. The only prize that ever mattered." Katherine lived another 6 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about Nathan and the life they had built together. She never remarried, saying that she had already had the love of her life and did not need another. When she passed away in 1942, at the age of 78, she was buried beside Nathan on a hill overlooking the ranch they had created together. The ranch continued to operate for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren, a testament to the love and hard work of the cowboy and the woman who had taken a chance on each other. And though the details of that day at the rodeo in 1885 became somewhat mythologized over the years, the essential truth remained the same. Nathan Ortega had won a championship and given the prize to Katherine Thorne, and she had responded by giving him her heart, her hand, and her entire life. It was a love story that began with a rodeo and a leap of faith, and it endured through decades of hard work, challenges, joys, and sorrows. It was a love story that created a family, a ranch, a legacy that lasted long after both of them were gone. It was, in the end, exactly the kind of love story the Wild West was made for, full of courage and passion and two people who chose each other every single day. And if you had asked Nathan or Katherine whether they would do it all again, whether they would make the same choices and walk the same path, they would have answered without hesitation. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Because what they built together was worth more than any prize, any fortune, any glory. What they built together was a life filled with love, and in the end, that was everything.